Welcome back to Beyond the Hedges. I'm your host, David Mansouri. Today, we're live at Alumni Weekend for a conversation with two incredible Rice alumni who are at the forefront of climate tech and environmental solutions. I'm joined by the co-founders of Coflux Purification, Dr. Alec Ajnsztajn and Dr. Jeremy Daum, both of whom received a PhD in material science and nanoengineering from Rice. Together, they co-founded Coflux Purification, a company born right here at Rice that is tackling one of the world's most critical environmental problems, forever chemicals, also known as PFAS. Their journey is a fantastic story of collaboration, innovation, and entrepreneurship, and a reminder that Rice isn't just about academics. It's also a launch pad for tangible, world-changing solutions. Okay, so instead of starting our conversation today with you telling us about your backgrounds and how you got to where you are, I want to actually ask you to set the stage for our conversation by giving us some foundational knowledge that I think will be helpful for our audience and our listeners to have to understand what we will be talking about for the next 45 minutes. And so could one of you or both of you explain what forever chemicals are, what is PFAS, and why are they such a massive problem?
Well, so PFAS or forever chemicals, they are a type of microplastic, though they are more like your Teflon, stuff that you use every day, stuff that your grandparents have been using since like the 40s. They're incredibly robust, they're hydrophobic, they are chemically resistant, they're great in places that you need something to just not wear away. But when you use those kind of products and you throw them out, that plastic, that Teflon, doesn't go away. It goes into landfills and then it gets into the environment. And that's what makes it so insidious, because the reason why they're called forever chemicals is because they have a half-life of about 40,000 years. So anything we made back in the 40s is still going around today, and that's how it's been getting into our blood, into our brains, and causing pretty major health effects such as heart and liver disease, cancers, and birth defects.
And one thing to add is that these chemicals are purely synthetic. They're not found in nature. And so that means that biology doesn't really have a way to deal with them. So when they get into your body, they get into the ecosystem, they stay there and they start causing these health effects. And so they really are a fully man-made problem that, ever since we've been producing them, where, the carbon-fluorine bond is a polymer chemist, it's a fun chemistry. But that same part that made it fun chemistry and makes it really, really useful is really what causes these negative impacts to the environment, negative impacts to human health, and has really set the stage to have this huge issue where we've been finding them everywhere. Over 97% of the basic blood in the world has PFAS in it. So bad news for the people in the room, people watching online, is that if you go get a blood test, they will find some PFAS chemicals in you. And additionally, it's not one chemical. It's actually a whole class of chemicals. It makes it very hard to deal with, because it's a big problem, because even if you just treat one, it doesn't mean you're treating all of them. And so that's a fundamental to the science and why it is so hard to deal with as a problem when you want to go clean these things up.
And then just to probe a little bit more, so people probably have heard of like forever plastics, right? So what can you describe? What's the difference between that and PFAS?
Yeah, so microplastics are these small plastics that are kind of found there. They're chemically different. The PFAS are these specific carbon fluoride chemicals that are specifically these kind of endocrine disrupting your biological systems, right? Because their ability to solubilize and actually get into your body, versus some of these particles are found, and those, to say the science there is actually emerging as well, but they're a much more difficult thing, and they play in concert where these microplastics can have PFAS in them, and that can then get in your body and then accumulate. So they're all kind of treated together, but these specific classes of chemicals have really been found to have these negative effects and needing to be cleaned up.
Yeah, and the other big problem about the specifically forever chemicals is that they're dangerous in basically any detectable level. Just a grain of salt, like a PFAS, as the grain of salt in a swimming pool, is dangerous because what happens is it gets in your body and then it doesn't leave. So when you drink it, when you drank it as a child, it's still in your body as when you're in your 80s. So that's why you need to deal with it in such low concentrations, because any amount of it, you don't want it building in your body.
And the main thing too is this chronic exposure over time. So it's not, you're taking some poison, it's that it's caused these things which lead to these health effects over time. And that's really hard to actually deal with because it is sticking around.
Okay, now that we are sufficiently concerned and understand the problem that you are working to solve for, now let's go back, and would love to hear about your journey. And maybe Alec, if you'll start, tell us a little bit about how you got to where you are, what your professional journey was, your academic journey, and then I'll ask Jeremy to do the same thing.
So I think kind of to take a big step up, I've always been kind of a bit obsessed with infrastructure. Jeremy has much to his chagrin, and Dana's not here too, so she won't hear it. But there might be an eye roll whenever I talk about any sort of infrastructure project, and that's kind of what got really interested into how we build things, how things do in the environment. When I started my undergrad in mechanical engineering, it really was why I want to be an engineer, and really want to be okay, I want to understand infrastructure, understand water, right? And so then when I decided I wanted to do grad school and do a PhD, don't always recommend that, generally don't recommend that. I was I really want to, learn about, materials and how we can apply them to real world applications. And that's when I kind of came to Rice in 2018. And then a couple of years in after that, I started working with two faculty, with Raphael Duskal and Ajnsztajn. Raphael's in the chemical engineering department, Ajnsztajn's in the material science department. He was the chair at the time. On basically how can we make materials that can do things, to solve some of these big infrastructure challenges, this water being one of them. I also spent some time doing other things. I worked at Intel for a little bit during the PhD for 6 months. And then between my PhD and my postdoc, I actually ran a local ballot initiative about how we fund regional infrastructure projects for things like flood control and road design and all these things. And so a lot of kind of this through line has been on how can we combine, infrastructure, policy needs, all these other needs, while still finding problems that need new scientific solutions. And Rice was a great place to do that, given just the focus on water, the huge cluster of research we have on these materials and all these things on it, which is why I kind of threw there. And then that kind of led to me coming back on this postdoc, which was funded by the Office of Innovation, to focus on, can we actually take the technology that we're working on and figure out, can we deploy it? Can we make a product out of it?
All right, Jeremy.
Yeah, no, my story is basically that I've always just loved building things. When I was in high school, for one of my calculus projects, I made a homemade railgun. Should not have been allowed to do that, but no one was really overseeing it, so it's great. Made a bang that shook the entire building. It was fantastic. But then afterwards, I kind of just started getting really involved in research at University of Cincinnati. I did there was an experiment back in high school where we actually made graphene using Scotch tape just in high school, and that really got me into nanotechnology. And so when I started looking at colleges, I was like, which one can I do nanoscience in? And actually, that was Cincinnati, a little lab called Nano World, which sounds like a roller coaster theme park, but it's not. It's real science. And then I did a lot of research making different nanomaterials via different methods that were focused on being scalable, something that people can actually use with. Because a lot of this nanotechnology is fantastic at doing the best at anything's ever done at it before. But can you make enough of it to be useful? Is always the question. And so my research has always been focused on, well, let's make enough of it so that someone can do something with it. So I actually then took that, and that's when the first project that Alec and I worked on here at Rice together was how we can mass produce the material that's actually now the fundamental part of our technology. So I've always been wanting to build stuff. I love making reactors. My job in the lab is I've made about 5 different reactors in the last 2 weeks. It's been fantastic. But kind of just this whole thing of how can we take this technology that I know can do so much? How can we make it big enough and fast enough that it can make a real impact in people's lives. And it just so happened that the hammer fit the nail, that this stuff is really good at dealing with PFAS. So, heck, worst case scenario, we choose the hardest problem we can find with the most impact. And if that doesn't work, then, we've already made the technology robust enough to do that. Then let's just go for something easier after that.
Okay, so I want to go a little bit deeper on that, Jeremy. So could you each talk about the research that you did at Rice, and then how you then connected, how you found each other to work on this specific problem of PFAS?
Okay, so I think I'll start because I was 2 years ahead of Jeremy. So we mean Jeremy are the same age. I just started 2 years before
Come
Jeremy.
on. You're going to get me with that one? I did 5 internships.
We get it. Okay. And so Jeremy had just started in the lab. It was 2020. It was kind of hard to do lab work. And I had this kind of crazy idea because we were working on these materials called covalent organic frameworks, which I don't know how many people follow the current Nobel Prize, but the Nobel Prize of Chemistry was named to something called metal-organic frameworks. These are similar, came into the same research. Instead of metals, though, they're fully organic, so there's no metals in it. It's all organic chemistry. And one of the big things was, great, they work, they do great properties, but how do you scale, create quality of them? And so I was working on some of the solution processing, but I had this idea, can we do it via some vapor phase deposition, which is basically a fancy thing for, can we heat them up and put them on a piece of, glass or a silicon wafer or something like that. And I needed to have some help with it because I love coming up with ideas. I'm actually quite bad at building things. And Jeremy was assigned what was, for all intents and purposes, a project that thermodynamically was going to go nowhere. And the student who ended up taking it over basically proved that, which is a very degrading project to have when you know that it's probably not going to work and your whole job is to prove it's not going to work. I was like, hey, Jeremy, I'm still working on that. Do you want to come help me build this reactor? I know you have experience building these things. Can you take my terrible sketch and mock this up with me?
Yep.
And I had inherited some old lab equipment from the first faculty member I'd started with who left. And so we had everything just kind of sitting around. And so that's when I was like, okay, Jeremy, why don't you come help me with this?
Yeah, and then Alec gave me the most overcomplicated design to do something extremely simple, and I just told him, don't do that. And we actually did kind of invent a really cheap way of converting a very traditional piece of equipment. That's actually what the paper that came out of it, that's actually what most people cite it for. It's not actually the technique of what you made out of it. It's actually the way we did it, of how we took this really common piece of equipment, we removed something from it, and suddenly it's now can do things that you would normally have to buy a piece of equipment that costs 10 or 100 times as much. So that's actually what the paper's most cited for, even though we did really good chemistry on it that people, they don't.
It took 2 years and a trip to a national lab to prove, but
it worked.
It worked.
But so we got really good at making this material. And then it just so happened that Raphael's lab, Verduzco, he has already been working on this type of material for PFAS destruction. That had already been the fundamentals on that had already been theorized. Some work had even gone into it, but no one was really, but the projects were actually all kind of being abandoned because people were just leaving, they were graduating. So we saw that opportunity, and, Alec had just graduated. We had a conversation where I said, hey, look, I really want to make this work. I want to commercialize this, because even though my whole thing going into it was how to make it so that someone else could do something with it, I didn't really trust industry to just pick that up themselves. Let's do it ourselves. I know this can work. So Alec and I basically, brainstormed for a couple weeks. We decided Alec was thankfully working on that ballot initiative, so he had some time to think about it and some time and some runway where he just wasn't actively searching for a job. And we were like, okay, let's throw out some applications. And it just so happened that that was right around the time that Lilly was opening up its innovation fellow applications. And the one small step, the first iteration of it was grant was the applications opened like literally the week we got the email, like literally the week we decided to do this.
And for those who don't know, what is Lilly? Will you just share what the...
It's the Lilly Entrepreneurship Lab. It's part of the Office of Innovation. It's over in the Cambridge building over there. I actually got involved with it because we were patenting the process that we were using to make the ones that we have in our paper. But the patent office at Rice was not answering my emails or my calls. And so I wanted to get in. So I was told, okay, Kyle Judith, the guy who basically runs Lilly, he's the guy to talk to. And so I emailed him and he never responded to me.
He never responds to emails.
He never responds to emails.
Shout out Kyle. I'm sure you'll hear this. And yes, we want to make that public. Respond to your emails.
There's a call out to Kyle Judith. You don't answer your emails. But so as a result, I decided to take his class, his 1 credit hour class, just to talk to him in person. And then it's like, okay, like went to the first one. It was okay, it was fine. And like, okay, I'll stick around and see how the rest of them. The next one was fantastic. Actually, we talked to Trevor Best was talking. It was like I learned so much about other hard tech entrepreneurs, and then we just kind of kept talking. And eventually, I got to talk to Kyle. I explained what I was doing. It's like, oh yeah, no, Alec, guy you haven't met yet. Yeah, no, we're doing a startup. We're talking, and Kyle kind of, I guess I get on Kyle's radar, and he tells me, oh, you should apply to this innovation fellow program. It's like, well, what's that? Oh, well, we give a bit of money and entrepreneurship training to PhDs that don't know how to run a business, which is all of us. We have to be taught this, okay? We think we know, we don't. And Kyle then took a step further, and this is getting to the real origin story here. And he told me, okay, Jeremy, I'm doing this showcase where like basically PhDs are going to go up and they're going to show off their tech, and a bunch of MBAs are going to come in, and we're trying to pair MBAs with PhDs. And I said, I just don't really think we need an MBA. Alec had,
and then I said, Jeremy, we need someone to help this, and the MBA is there, you better go. I think I was knee deep in the campaign at the time because I think it was the week of early voting, and so I was
he's door knocking.
I was door knocking. I was
like 8 hours a day.
Yeah, so I was running this campaign. So I was not that available, but I said, Jeremy, go.
Yep. So I did go, and Kyle knew that Dana, our co-founder, was going to be there. But what happened is that I walk in, I sit down, the first person I talk to is Dana. And she asked me, oh, what are you doing here? I'm like, oh, we have a startup with PFAS. And she's like, oh, I was just involved in something like that. I have a bit of entrepreneurship experience with Lilly. I'm like, you do? And she's like, oh yeah, no, I've worked on PFAS. I know the PFAS issue really well. Like, oh, okay. And so we talk for literally 30 seconds. We get each other's contact information, and then I do the rest of the night. And 3 days later, we're having coffee, and we like each other's vibes. We both care about the mission. We both, Dana has an immense amount of experience in environmental consulting, working on that kind of outreach, is specifically on PFAS, which is just crazy to find something so specific and so targeted. And we decided, let's do a 2-week project together. And yeah.
Awesome. Okay, and then today you've raised now $1.3 million.
Yep.
Walk us through, maybe Alec, talk us through like from that moment to where you are right now.
So in that moment, the first thing we got was the One Small Step grant from the Office of Innovation. I see Nafisa's in the audience. Shout out Nafisa. Adrian Traumel, the interim vice president of innovation, is not here this week. He is out of town, so he doesn't get a shout out because he's not here. So Adrian at the time then wound up getting this grant. We wrote this grant and then invited us to basically give this pitch at an event in the Ion called Pumps and Pipes. We're like, well, we got to come up with a name. And so we came up with Coflux, which I will now let Jeremy explain because it involves puns, much to my pain and suffering.
Yeah, I don't make puns often, but I do base my life around them. So basically, we were actually, the fun thing about the name is that the secret technology is in the name. Covalent Organic Frameworks, COFs. And what do we use in addition as the energy source? Light. Coflux. But also, it's a two-stream process. We do two things at once, and it's all flowing. So, Coflux. It's a double pun. I was cooking with that one.
Jeremy has titled multiple papers puns as well.
And I will keep doing it.
In the academic literature, just as another point of reference.
Awesome.
Again, I base my life around them.
Okay, so will you describe specifically what your product does? And I will say, for this episode, I had a fairly long conversation with ChatGPT to try to understand what we currently do with PFAS. And my understanding is that we just sort of put a Band-Aid on it is the best way to describe it, I think. But you are doing something different.
Yeah.
And so can you just describe what's different about
Yeah,
what you do?
and I think part of it we figured out. So what we realized these materials, right, when we were writing these applications, where I think, I didn't fully answer your question. I think the side in the puns is that we realized they could do two things, right? So we could capture the PFAS, and that's what's currently done. Your active carbons, filters, membranes, right? But then we could also use the light to actually destroy the PFAS, and that fully removes it, turns it into fluoride carbon dioxide, no longer have to deal with things that biology can handle, right, that aren't going to actually, cause these health effects. And so what we realized is that we combine that, and that lets us simplify the treatment trains, which is the technical term for having all these systems together, by combining them into one system on one material. And that means that we can actually treat the water at lower cost, more efficiently, and fully get rid of the problem, where we're not just capturing it, like these carbons that then have to be kind of stored, and we're kind of putting it down later and being like, okay, great, we'll figure it out how to deal with later, which adds complexity, adds cost, and then you still, it got to put it somewhere and hope it doesn't, leach out. And so that is something that, as we were kind of thinking through this, we realized, wow, this data kind of proves all that out. And that's when we kind of started writing all these grant applications. I got something called the Activate Fellowship, which is a fellowship where it's 2 years of funding to focus on really taking scientists and training them to be entrepreneurs at the company. And that's where we really started digging into what that looked like from what was basically this kind of benchtop system into, how do we build a real reactor and actually scale this? And so that's kind of where we, are right now on this. Is we took what was that existing science base from the university, right, and are now really building these initial prototypes to actually treat real world water at real scale.
Yeah. And the very top level explanation of it all is that it's like a Mr. Clean magic eraser where you just pump the PFAS water in, the PFAS absorbs onto the sponge, and then you turn on the light, and like a bug zapper, it unzips the PFAS molecule down to CO2 and fluoride, all stuff that biologically can be handled. So it's a way of really simplifying the process. Instead of needing first you capture it, then you send it somewhere else, and they either incinerate it, which might put it back in the environment, or another expensive process. You can do it all in one step at the source.
So now let's look ahead 10 years, I don't know, or longer or shorter. What's the promise of this technology more broadly? I mean, what you're describing to me, I immediately go towards is this a solution for PFAS just generally, right? I mean, it's like maybe we don't have PFAS in the water anymore because of this technology, 20 years from now. What's the promise of what you're doing over the long term?
I think the thing is that, removing PFAS, but not only just PFAS, because the nice part about these materials is that they are, a very, very fancy polymer. And so we can change it, design, look at other chemicals. And so we're really thinking about this too as a platform. And so you have both PFAS and treating the PFAS where they still need to be used. So there's critical use cases in things like the semiconductor industry, which I know before you asked me, there's my one AI tie-in for you is, if we're going to keep making chips, we still probably need some PFAS for the next 10 years. But the other thing that this really can promise is both that, but there are going to be, multiple technologies that are going to have different applications. But really getting to the ability to get the cost down on treatment where we need it is huge to get to that scale. And right now, there are no good solutions that fully break the problem for good. And so that's how we're thinking about for the next 5-10 years, is really getting to a scale where we can actually treat, enough PFAS to make a difference, clean up the water where we need to, and really solve the problem for good. And then thinking about how that can be applied to other emerging contaminants, because we put a lot of things. So I think reference is that I consider myself to be a polymer scientist. In the 40s and 50s, we spent a lot of fun time doing a lot of fun chemistry and didn't really think through how a lot of that chemistry wound up. And PFAS aren't the only thing. It's just kind of the thing that's gotten the most press and tip of the iceberg. There are tons of these endocannabinoid chemicals that need to be treated that are at these really low levels. And so it's looking not just at this problem right now that people are willing to actually start solving, that people are willing to pay for, but how can we make sure this applies to things moving forward as we realize there are these more, micro and nanoplastics and these other kind of endocrine disruptors in the environment, to really think through that as a whole ability to solve all of these issues in waste streams where we need to do this chemistry.
That's cool. All right. My last one before we turn to the audience is, you've talked a little bit about the ways in which the rice ecosystem has supported this work, right? I mean, this is this technology that came out of Rice University's labs. This is a company that got significant investment to help launch. But I want to ask you both to talk a little bit more about what at Rice, what are some attributes and initiatives at Rice that have helped turn this like deep tech research into a company that is trying to solve a global problem?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest problem in starting this kind of deep technology that, comes out of a lab is the beginning of how do we pay people? How do we get people to be able to focus on this full time? Because when you do a startup, commitment for the founders is so important. You can't partially go into it. If you want to make a real difference, you really have to jump in. But people need salaries, people need to eat. So where Rice really helped us was that when we first started, the Lilly Innovation Fellowship got us $10,000. And I was like, okay, $10,000, it's not much to pay Alec, but we could probably pay him 3 months on that. So when we got there, we're like, okay, we can try for 3 months and that'll get us that. Then we got the one small step, another 80K. Like, oh my goodness, we can pay Alec an almost real salary for a year. That's crazy. So, and that allowed us to, and I was doing my PhD, so at least, and I was on a fellowship, so I was allowed to research what I wanted. That meant that we could have 2 people properly working on this. And between then the innovation fellow giving me that additional training, that support network, really encouraging us to go out to these business plan competitions, one of which was the Napier Rice launch competition, which we got second place at, which gave us another $25K. All of that was what built up. As Kyle loves saying, momentum breeds momentum. Yes, I said it for you. Okay, you can chuckle now.
Hungry owls fly faster.
And
getting the end of it.
If we're that's a different
good one. Hungry owls fly faster.
Oh yeah, I
was very proud of it.
We actually had to look that one up and make sure it's factual. It is actually factual, and I hate that. Yeah, fine. But where Rice has really helped us was that Lilly, the Office of Innovation, they have been our #1 allies and supporters the entire time. They set us up with Dana, who's been instrumental in all this. They gave me the training to do this kind of stuff. They helped Alec practice for his Activate final, the one where they grill you with a bunch of questions, interview. God, I couldn't think of that word. They helped him practice for that. All of our business competitions, we practice for hours on end with with various people from around Lilly and Office of Innovation. They have been our #1 supporters the whole time.
Also, Rafael Verduzco in the chemical engineering department, our advisor, really has been super supportive on, being super understanding, I don't know this, I'm going to refer to you as the experts on this, and overall being a pleasure to work with from both our end, from both the Rice partnerships, facilitating connections, letting us, mooch lab space for maybe a little longer than we should have, while we were still getting the other space set up, and connecting us on there, and the chemical engineering department as a whole, where our lab space is currently subleased from a former Rice faculty member who left Rice about 5 years ago to move full-time on his company. And so that as well has been key, where the department has been super supportive, or our faculty is super supportive on getting this and really understanding and learning with us, while not trying to, think that he knows too much and really, committing to making it work. Yeah. And so that is the other part that was super, super needed to get this to work, because, you don't want to have... You need those partnerships. You need that, manpower and resource, as well as all of our, existing advisors, as well, both with ties to Rice, and then, from building that foundation to, get other funding, where we got a grant from the U.S. Department of Agriculture, where we were able to raise other money on top of that and activate, and that really set that initial one to then be able to go and raise that money, get the lab, use the network, leverage what was in Houston, leverage other connections, both in academia and through the networks, to really build what that needed. And it wouldn't have really been possible without that initial setup and support from, Rice, Lilly, the Office of Innovation, and the chemical engineering department. If it wasn't for that initial setup that let us have that leeway to figure it out, to go and realize not only do we have to pay people, but we have to go figure out, is there a real market? How do we get other kind of, checks to kind of do things? And how do we really understand, how do we turn what is a research project into, a, R&D project for a corporate one, to now like a actual product we can go and sell?
Okay. So my next question is about advice that you have for current or prospective students who might want to do what you're doing, right? Who might be interested in research or technology, or but are predominantly thinking about those things from like sort of an academic perspective, and might want to think about how to translate that work into business. And so I'd be curious whether it's, maybe there's a student at Rice right today who's thinking about that, or a prospective student who's thinking about how to sort of make that transition and maybe scratch both of those itches. What advice would you have?
My thing is that go talk to people. So like, you want to know something, send someone a LinkedIn message, just go have those conversations, right? And figure out the resources, but also figure out, like, is this a question and problem worth asking? And to do that, you have to, and people are, especially when you want to ask about their problems, they really want to tell you about their problems.
Yep. No, I agree. It's one of those things of like understanding that, figure out if your baby's not ugly. Exactly. That's the thing that, people will tell you your baby's ugly if you have if you think, because you care about what you're doing so much, and it's so hard to look at it objectively. And other people, when you ask them, what are your problems? You need to be able to figure out whether or not your solution fits their needs. And so that sometimes involves, finding out your baby's ugly and that you maybe want to solve another problem. Maybe you need to challenge your assumptions. But at the end of the day, you need to go out and you need to talk to people. At Rice, you have plenty of resources. I've already been waxing philosophical enough on the Office of Innovation, but also the people around you are your best supporters. And really, if you have that drive, there are pitch competitions where you can just try it out. You could just go up, and worst case scenario, you made a slide deck and you wasted 5 minutes. So like that kind of stuff is just all around. Just try.
Great. Okay, we'll turn to a question. Because this is Alumni Weekend, I might ask if you will tell us who you are and what year you graduated from Rice.
My name is Sheffa Gordon, and I graduated from Rice in 1998. This is really exciting to see the promise of your research here. I'm curious about the regulatory framework. If this were a medical product or food product, you'd have a clear path with the FDA. Alec, you mentioned that in the 40s and 50s we made a lot of chemicals, then released them in the wild, and we didn't think about what would become of them. Well, how do we know? What can you think of? First of all, what agencies internationally, nationally do you have to think about to make sure what you release is safe? And other certain different type of tests. What's the next steps?
Yeah, so the regulatory framework for these kind of chemicals is quite complex. So you have a combination of factors. The main one is driven by the EPA. And there's three main alphabet soup acronyms. There's TRI, there's CERCLA, and then there's the drinking water standards, which again are Washington alphabet soup. But basically what they do is they say, okay, now when we release chemicals, you have to report it. They also hold liability. CERCLA is also known as Superfund, which is something that might be a little more common in parlance. And that lets people access both funding to clean it up, but also means that you are now exposed to liability. And so then you see regulation not only on that, but you see private action through lawsuits. And you've seen millions of dollars in settlements against PFAS producers, against places where there have been PFAS being used in products. And so that has been something that's a huge liability issue for both people making these chemicals that is forcing change on actually doing treatment and remediation. And then the kind of last part to it is that there are state level regulations where states can set stricter regulations than national ones as well. And so we're seeing that being applied. And so it's a very complicated moving environment. And as things really move, and so there's a lot of change on it. But then there also are use cases where there's been also pushing from the Department of Defense because of its prevalence in firefighting foam. And so that has also been applied to those industries and that as well. So there's been a big push from the Department of Defense on that and where they've had contaminated sites. And that's kind of with these other agencies. And internationally, you see similar things. So you see that those use cases, it can get quite complicated. But there are these clear pathways that are coming, or they're already existing, that is a required treatment in drinking water, treatment in industrial sites. And is also just now we have to start saying we're using it, and there's no minimum amount for discharge anymore. So usually you could say no. And because of PFAS, one of the big issues in 2015, they actually redid that TRI, which is Toxic Release Inventory, or under TSCA, which is the Toxic Substance Control Act, which again, alphabet soup. But this basically mean that now we have to do more work on the front end before introducing these new chemicals and actually track and monitor them.
Yeah, you asked him a question about infrastructure and policy. This is your fault.
Okay, next question. If you'll just tell us who you are and what year you graduated from Rice.
Yes, Rahul Patel, graduated in '94, Hanson College also. So yeah, congratulations on your accomplishments so far. A few questions. Where do you envision your product implemented eventually? In people's homes to purify water, at city water processing plants, somewhere in between? And then the other, ultimately the cost, if you can scale it up, what would be the cost for, say, 1,000 gallons of water?
Yeah. So the first thing on the use case, probably not home usage. A couple reasons. One, UV lights, control on it, individual costs, and also it is just when I think back to we want to solve the issue. It is not, from a policy perspective, a cost-efficient, good way to try to do things at home use at point of source. There are good filters. If you want to buy a filter, I have some I would recommend, but that's not how we envision the product, and that's how we see it from our own kind of values and alignment on it. Obviously, we'd love to do eventual drinking water. There's lots of issues with that when it comes to scale and getting things there. And so initially, we're looking at industrial applications or site remediation. So where you're doing smaller flow streams, there's specific sites you have to remediate where maybe they were using these firefighting foams, using these chemicals, or where they still have to use these chemicals, like in the semiconductor industry, where they're really prevalent for things like in photoresists used for lithography, which sounds very fancy, but it is how you actually put the little patterns on the chips. And so with no photoresists, no chips. And so the current formulas need these fluorinated compounds, and they are going to phase them out eventually, but there still will be use cases for them that is going to take a long time where they have to actually start doing abatement now, as if they want to keep having the volumes in productions. And so that's where we're thinking through this now. But there's a lot of these use cases. And the one thing of the PFAS is that they're sticky. They love to stick around. So even when you've changed them out, they'll stick around for 10, 20 years, and you'll be releasing them for kind of years. And that is now an issue because now you are still releasing them even if you've stopped putting them in to your pipes. And so you have to clean it up, do the remediation, and actually get it out of your system for good.
Okay. And then the cost?
Yes.
Yeah.
The cost is a bit of a complicated problem, but if Jeremy wants to take it, I've been talking too much.
Well, so the idea is that the reason why we want to use this technology so much is because it combines two systems into one. Rather, the cost of first handling it, of like capturing it, transporting it, then destroying it, that's one-time use. You then have to buy more stuff to capture it again. That all adds up. That costs carbon, that costs electricity. It's expensive to do. We're hoping to massively reduce the cost of either system. Our hope is to make this cheaper than just even capturing it alone. And that includes the power that goes into it, because the biggest thing about one of the biggest thing about PFAS is that it's so sturdy, so you need so much energy to destroy it. So therefore, what we do to avoid that is that we use a catalyst. We use a catalyst that lowers the amount of energy we need in order to destroy it, so we can use it's far lower on your energy bill. You can reuse the catalyst, so it's far lower on the cost of the initial material, and then you don't have to worry about the problem anymore. For our customers, that means that you won't get sued. There have been a lot of lawsuits coming out on that. Some of the largest lawsuits in world history have been over PFAS. So it's not a non-issue. It's not the lawyer costs are non-trivial. So by dealing with it, you can save on all three of those aspects.
Okay. So we're going to turn to our final section of our discussion today. And as listeners of the Beyond the Hedges podcast may know, we ask the same three questions at the end of every episode. It is a lightning round. So I'm going to ask each of these three questions to each of you. And yeah, would love your thoughts. So the first question: what is your favorite spot on the Rice campus?
Honestly, I really like the 5th floor of the Ralph O'Connor building. That it's relatively new, but it's probably one of my favorite spots. Great to watch fireworks from.
Good. Okay, Alec.
I'm surprised Jeremy says I'm going to say Valhalla.
Okay, come on, that's a cop-out.
I know, but you're the bartender, not me. There's cheap beer.
I can't just say Valhalla. That's cheating.
Okay. Next, what's the best book that you've read recently?
I'm a big Brandon Sanderson fan, so he just came out with Ember Dark recently, and I actually really enjoyed that one. It's a nice story. It's kind of a play on a lot of Polynesian mythology, but introducing it into that like fantasy world. So it's really good. You cannot read it without having read a bunch of stuff prior, so I can't say that's your dipping in point. If you want to read Brandon Sanderson, start with Mistborn.
And I've been revisiting some classic sci-fi. So I've just finished rereading Left Hand of Darkness by Ursula K. Le Guin recently, which is it's a great book, especially on our technology and asking, why do we do things? How does society work? And felt quite appropriate given the problem we're solving. And there's one specific passage where, there's these basic transport vans in it, and they're like, well, they only go up to 55 miles an hour. And the guy who's visiting this planet from the world is like, well, why? And they're like, why not? Which I think is a good question to apply to PFAS and how we think about technology, right? Why do we do things, and really thinking through some of that. And that was, a question that we were asking in the 60s as we were starting to put these things in the environment that we're still now dealing with the consequences now.
Okay, last question. So, as you may know, when students apply to Rice as an undergraduate, they are presented with the box, which is a question where they share an image that is meaningful to them. And so I want to ask each of you, what image would you put in your box?
Kitties. Yeah, I had 2 little cats, Navi being customer number 2. They're so sweet, and I love them.
Great. I think that right now I'd put the photo of the new prototype reactor. I know it's another cop out from.
Come on, dude.
But it's it's like Jeremy's kittens. It's also a bit of our child.
Come on, dude.
He's allowed to put whatever he wants.
Yeah, he's allowed to plug, I guess. Yeah.
It is the role as CEO, Jeremy.
I'm the CTO. I built the darn thing.
I know, but I got a plug.
The alpha, yeah, we just made 3 ones are alpha, beta, and gamma. We tried coming up with different names, but just couldn't. Like, if anyone has any recommendations for like 3 characters, like one's skinny, one's regular, and one's stout, like shout them out. Like, we're thinking about that kind of stuff. We need naming convention.
And Jeremy would approve if it was a pun, and I will disapprove, and I will get overruled.
Yes, he will get overruled.
Okay, so this has been a really incredible and fun conversation. Alec and Jeremy, your work is I think, a really fantastic example of bridging research and entrepreneurship, and bridging academics and real world impact. And so really appreciate you sharing your journey, for sharing the Coflux story with us, your passion for the work that you're doing. And I would just say to our listeners and those of you who are with us today, if you want to learn more about Coflux Purification, you can visit them at cofluxpurification.com. And as always, you can find Beyond the Hedges, our podcast, wherever you get your podcasts. We'll look forward to seeing you next time. And please join me in thanking our amazing speakers today. Thanks for listening to Beyond the Hedges. Let us know you're listening by completing the form in the episode description. We'll be randomly selecting listeners to receive Rice swag every month. Beyond the Hedges is a program of the Office of Alumni Relations and is hosted by me, David Mansouri. For more information on this episode, visit our website at alumni.rice.edu. You can also head over to your favorite podcast app, subscribe, and leave us a review. Beyond the Hedges is a production of Rice University and is produced by University FM.